Hello, this is David from DN Cognitive Counseling. Tonight we're going to start on page 47, the end of the third chapter of the book White Fragility. Cultural racism. The body of research about children and race demonstrates that white children develop a sense of white superiority as early as preschool. Now that's very interesting because if you take a look at children in preschool, the way they treat each other has been pretty good. I'm wondering how they delineated that. She quotes a study, but I'm not that familiar with it. But let's take for a second, she's talking about socialization. I'd like to understand how white superiority takes place at that point. This early start shouldn't be surprising as society sends constant messages that whites is better than to be a person of color. Again, I don't agree with that premise. I think that the nature of society is that historically whites have had an advantage, and that has had an effect. But to say that now society says because somebody has white skin now they are superior to a black person, I don't believe that most white people would believe that today. Despite the claims of many white young adults that racism is in the past, and that they were taught to see someone as equal, research shows otherwise. For example, polls sponsored by MTV, I always like to go to MTV as my source for scientific information, in 2004, showed that millennials profess more tolerance and a deeper commitment to equality and fairness than previous generations did. At the same time, millennials are committed to the ideal of colorblindness. That leaves them uncomfortable with and confused about race and opposed to measures to reduce racial inequality. Now, this is the problem with her argument. She's saying that because millennials see things colorblind, therefore by their inherent aspect they're dealing with their white superiority because they don't see the race. Perhaps most significantly, 41% of white millennials believe that government pays too much attention to minorities, and 48% believe that discrimination against whites is a big problem, as discrimination against people of color. Now, does she understand why that's the case? Because there's two different things that the people in society are looking at as opposed to what the millennial is looking at. From the standpoint here, what Robin DiAngelo and a lot of people in her mindset look at is they look at statistics and they look at the averages and they believe that things should work across the board in terms of the averages. And when they don't come out the same way, that's evidence of systemic racism. That's the premise. She, in fact, says that if you believe there's any other reason why there are any differences, that's racism. If you believe there's another outside factor that contributes to anything, that's racism. So the problem in her thought process is that the millennial who's coming about it says, what do you mean hire people on the basis of color? That sounds racist to me. So when you talk about the ideas of affirmative action or trying to change the status of a community to make it equally represented, to a millennial who says, I don't have a racist ideology, they should be able to compete, I should be able to compete, it should be an even playing field, they don't see it that way. Now, it is true the millennial is not taking a look at the years and the framework that African Americans have systematically in terms of slavery and in terms of the Jim Crow laws have had to been held back. See, that statement is still true, but it doesn't change the fact that it's still better from a mindset to have the millennial mindset than this mindset. With the millennial mindset, eventually, in a very short period of time, African Americans will become equal in all those areas as long as we deal with the inequality aspect of education and to help change the mindset that math and objectivity and science are somehow white, because that's not going to help. So if we help the community to understand that it doesn't need to change its cultural its identity or its ramifications, but the nature of its decision-making process, that it has agency to actually make change, and they can better their community. And I hate to say their community, because in reality it's our community, because again I fall into the same logical fallacy that black and white communities are separated and switched. Like we're like all segregated and living in. It's just not true. And again, I don't come from a Robin DiAngelo type of community. I come from a very mixed community. So if things are going wrong in that community, it's affecting me. So that's a problem in a thought process here. Many in this generation claim that the election of Barack Obama as president shows that we are post-racial. The reason why that shows that we are post-racial is because they're using the identity of racism and the definition of racism, what it meant. There's no person, a white supremacist, would allow to vote for a president that was black. They would see that as absolutely insane. You go back to the 1940s and 1930s, and you went to any white supremacist around, and you said, by the way, we're going to elect this president to be black, they would think you're out of your mind. It was a validation to society. Now, by the way, and this is the interesting part, if the rest of society voted for Barack Obama in order to prove they were not racist, and therefore were voting for a black man on purpose to show that we're not racist, that would be racist. So if they said, we're voting for Barack Obama because he's black, and I want to show that I'm not a racist person, so I'm putting a black man there, that would be a racist vote. But on the other hand, if they just voted for him because they liked his ideas and they thought he was a great politician, as the idea that so many other black politicians have been elected, and I don't think people voted for them because of the aspect of race. So I'm not assuming that most people that were white voted for Barack Obama because they were trying to show their racial solidarity. Because if they did that, that would be racist. That would be evidence, by the way, that there's still racist ideology. It's just in the opposite direction to try to show how not racist I am. I'm going to show you how racist I am. Could you imagine marrying somebody, a person of another color or another race, just to show that you're not a racist? Inherently, you're showing you're racist. It's just you're trying to fight against your racism. It would be like with a lot of people who were homosexuals, and they married women who were heterosexuals, and then got into that because they didn't want to admit their homosexuality. So they didn't want to admit to it, so they married somebody that had families with them, even though they were living a lie. And that would be that type of mentality. Again, I don't believe that's the mentality, but at least then you have an argument to say that's the reason why. She doesn't make that argument. These polls were conducted before the presidency of Donald Trump. But as his election has made clear, we are far from being post-racial. Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. And this goes by the trope. Again, whether you agree with Donald Trump or not is irrelevant. The nature of calling him a racist is very hard if you know anything about Donald Trump, who was very big in the Democratic Party in New York, basically big wig in the Democratic Party for many, many years. Around the celebrities, rappers love him. Specifically, he's in rap songs. They refer to Donald Trump. He is not, again, I'm not going to defend anything about the narcissistic aspects or anything else about Donald Trump. But to say that Donald Trump is racist is not to know who he is. It's not there as in terms of evidence. To say he says things that are foolish and you could be able to say something about it, yeah. But you could do the same thing with Joe Biden. He actually made a lot of comments. Although the fact is you actually say that Joe Biden's actually more racist than Donald Trump by actual statements of fact and people that they actually supported historically. But getting away from that argument, and I'm not going to get involved in the back and the forth, the nature by saying that people voted for Donald Trump because of racism is a unsubstantiated statement. I don't think that because it makes, first of all, it makes no sense, because they're saying that they voted for Barack Obama because they show that it was a post-racial thing, and then all of a sudden now where'd those people go? As opposed to saying that Hillary Clinton really blew the election, and people didn't like Hillary Clinton, and that she didn't do a good job running. In fact, she didn't go to many of the states she lost to even campaign. I mean, it's like, no, we don't have to any of those things. It's racist. If you voted for Obama, it was because you were trying to be racist. If you voted against him, it's racist. No matter what you look like, it's racist. There's no other way to view anything but through the lens of race. And anybody who views anything only from the lens of race is racism. Another significant study that was based on practices of millennials rather than their claims was conducted by sociologists Leslie Pica and Joe Feigen. Finally, a study. They asked 626 white college students at 28 colleges across the United States to keep journals and record every incidence of racial issues, racial images, and racial understanding that they observed and were a part of for 6 to 8 weeks. The students recorded more than 7,500 accounts of blatant racist comments and actions by the white people in their lives, friends, families, acquaintances, strangers. These accounts came from the generation most likely to claim they were taught to see everyone as equal. Those who grew up in an age of colorblind ideology after the Civil Rights Movement. Pica and Fagan's study proves empirical evidence that racism continues to be explicitly expressed by whites, even those who are young and profess to be progressive. Consider these examples from their study. As I sit in a room with a bunch of frat guys, Phil walks in chanting, Rashodi, Rashodi, Rashodi. I ask what the term means, and I'm answered with a giggle giggle. It's slang for the N-word. Like N, and I don't even understand what this means. Robbie was telling a joke. He glanced to see if anyone was around. He starts, a black man, a Latin man, and a white guy find the magic lamp at the beach. Racist joke ensues. I thought it was pretty funny, and it wasn't the only one, but I'm glad he waited till no one was around to tell it. And if you didn't know Robbie, you might misunderstand. Several common dynamics are illustrated in these thousands of examples Pica and Fagan collected. The first is how much explicit racism young people are exposed to and participate in. The second is the idea that if someone is a good person, the person cannot be racist, as demonstrated in the student's note that if someone overheard this person might misunderstand Robbie. Let me explain to the person and the aspects of dynamics here. Do you believe that African Americans tell jokes about white people? I don't know. Let's listen to Chris Rock or any other black comedian. The nature that people tell jokes is going to happen. You're going to find this about Jews, Polish, French, English. There has not been a society that has not told jokes about people or in ways to stereotype people in jokes. The nature of calling that racist by itself, I think is insane. And what she's saying is that Robbie's intent isn't to be racist. Robbie's intent is to be funny. And this is a way that he does it. The same way that somebody can tell a Jewish joke and not be anti-Semites. I've had clients who are Jewish tell me Jewish jokes and they weren't being anti-Semitic. I've had black people tell me black jokes and not be racist. One of the kids cracked me up. I'll never forget this. This little African-American kid, 13 years old. He told me a racist joke. And I wouldn't repeat it, but it was hilarious. And it was because it caught me so off guard. But the nature of it being funny and the fact that it was a joke doesn't make it the fact that now you believe that you're racist, according to the definition of racism, which goes back to the idea that one group is superior over another. Not the idea that something can't be funny about a group of another. When Seinfeld tells jokes and in reference to his neurosis and the problems that he has in his family, or they tell Italian jokes or Spanish jokes, that doesn't make them racist against those groups. Humor is not designed that way, but it's designed that way in this place because the nature of that. Now, there is real racism. People have really racist things that people have said in their families. I deal with this a lot where I hear people talk about racist things. But there are many racists in every culture and society. I remember one of my favorite lines. God, what was his name? He was a comedian. He said he was talking about his father. And it's going to be funny. As soon as I finish the video, his name's going to probably pop into my head. Anyway, his line was, it was very funny. He says that my father was really, and he's a black comedian. He goes, my father was really racist. And the race he was most racist against was the humans. I thought it was a very funny line. And, the nature of the mindset is that, yes, people aren't going to be able to make jokes. But that doesn't mean that they're racist. Unless you want to live with a world where there is no humor anymore. And by the way, no sexist jokes. No, ethnic jokes. No, so look what you're left with. As you keep cutting and cutting the ability for people to make humor. But that's what happens. And that's what the person means when they say, he's not racist, he's trying to be funny. And this is things that make people laugh. Robbie, this sort of racism makes him very challenging dynamic in which whites are opening under the false assumption that we can simultaneously be good people and participate in racism. At the same time that we're dishonest about really we really think and do regarding people of color. And as I said, does that make every single person of color that tells jokes about white people racist? I would say absolutely not. And by the way, in seeing many of the comedians, I actually enjoy those jokes just as much as I enjoy any other joke. It's about the wit. It's about the idea that you don't see it coming. Humor has a whole psychology into itself. And to equate that psychology with racism is insane. In fact, she would be talking about all these racist comedians all over the place, because I don't believe there's any very few comedians that don't talk about some culture or some aspect of that. If that, then you can call them sexist for the jokes they make about women and the way they put women down. The study also reveals a consistent pattern in how these comments and actions were expressed. The majority of incidents occurred in what research described as the backstage, in an all-white company. And the reason why a lot of time that happens is because people are afraid of offending other people. It's not that people can't make these jokes in mixed company. There are places where I have mixed company where I can make jokes, and people of that mixed company can make jokes with me, because we know each other and it's okay. We recognize who we are. But if somebody makes a joke in front of somebody else they don't know, you start to ask the question, are they making a joke or are they being racist? So there is a difference, and that's why it's important to understand where this is coming from. What is the reason why it's being done? Further, they found that whites involved in the incidents most often played predictable roles. Typically, there was a protagonist who initiated the racist act, a cheerleader who encouraged it through laughter or agreement, the spectator who stood in silence, and very rarely a dissenter who objected. Virtually all dissenters were subject to a form of peer pressure in which they were told it was only a joke, and they should lighten up. Yeah, if it was a joke, they should lighten up. And the nature is, what type of world does she want to create where nobody can joke with each other? I want you to think about that. The researchers document this in a front stage setting, those in which people of color were present, and white students displayed a range of racially conscious behaviors, including the following. Acting overly nice. Wow, horrible. Avoiding contact, crossing the street or not going into a particular bar or club. Mimicking black mannerisms or speech. Wow, I wonder if she thought this about Hillary Clinton when she went to speak in front of the church, a black church, and she started putting on an accent. It is something that a lot of politicians do. I hate when they do it, by the way, but a lot of them do it. Being careful not to use racial terms or labels. Again, this is the problem of offending people, and people can get offended for many different things. And that's the nature and the problem of that. We don't want to offend people, and we want to stay away from offending people. And if you know the crowd and you know who you're talking to, you could say a lot of things. Charlemagne the God was talking to a comedian. I keep forgetting the guy's name, but he's very funny. He has a YouTube channel also, and they were doing racial jokes, and they were talking that, and fine with it, because why? They know each other. They know where he was coming from. Using code words to talk negatively about the people of color. Occasional violence directed at the people of color. By the way, that occasional violence at the people of color, that would be racist. All these other ones are more subtle and actually have other reasons besides racism. It has the idea that what Miss DiAngelo doesn't seem to really understand is the idea of not trying to hurt people who have the ability to misunderstand something. I have ran groups for many years, and during that time period, for the most part, I get along incredibly well with the people I work with. But every once in a while, I will say something or do something, and it's going to rub somebody the wrong way. And then the next time, I got to be more careful about how I do that. I don't want to do that again. But it's not because I did something wrong to begin with. It's just the nature of somebody's sensitive in that line. I have to be careful. That's the nature of it, and that's the problem. In backstage settings where people of color were not present, white students often had humor to reinforce racial stereotypes about people of color, particularly blacks. Pickett and Fagan argued the purpose of these backstage performances is to create white solidarity and reinforce the ideology of white and male supremacy. This behavior keeps racism circulating, albeit in less formal but perhaps more powerful ways than in the past. Wow. Now, this is less formal, so it's more powerful. I would say it's a lot less powerful. And the proof is in the nature of all the objective data. There are actually more interracial couples today than before. There's people living more in mixed communities than the days before. that the nature of the middle class, African Americans have entered and living in more places, and it's been opened. The ability for people to have interracial friendships, although she doesn't really seem to believe it's possible, but it does happen. But the nature of what people are objectively has changed greater. Today we have cultural norms that insist we hide our racism from people of color. Yes, I would not want anybody to be opening with their racism. I understand that people like it sometimes because you know who your enemy is, but I'd rather the idea of racism be a bad thing than a good thing. And I'll go back to Nazi Germany. In Nazi Germany, it had anti-Semitism, and anti-Semitism was underneath the surface for a long time. But you know when it got really dangerous? When anti-Semitism became the forefront and everybody was okay with being anti-Semitic. It led to a lot more people's death. So the nature that we understand that racism is not a good thing, that it should be challenged. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with saying, by the way, I found that joke racist, or it went over far. And you sometimes will hear that in a comedy club. Like somebody goes, and the comedian will go, oh, I guess that was a little too far. That does happen, even in a comedy club. Because, then, and again, it's meant to be only humorous and funny. But to say that you would want racism out in the open, to me is insane. But now that we are actually challenging it, in fact, we are socially penalized for challenging racism. Again, we should be penalized for being racist. We're not socially penalized for challenging racism ever. I'm often asked if I think the younger generation is less racist. No, I don't. Well, then you don't know what racism is. In some ways, racism, adaptation over time are more sinister than concrete rules such as Jim Crow. Wow. I'm going to say this, and there's a very important point. We are not that far away from Jim Crow. Jim Crow was around not too long ago. We're only a few generations away. We have made tremendous progress in terms of our ability to be a society that is much more tolerant. And the nature of that tolerance, first of all, has to be of tolerating different people's ideas, which we become a little less tolerant about. But we should be as much, and to encourage people to be as tolerant as possible. And to call people out on their bad ideas, you still have to give people the ability to be who they are as people. And not to just shun everybody away with labels, which is being done constantly. But as a society, we still have come a long way in the ability for us to allow ourselves to incorporate. There are things that we do today that would never have been done 40, 50 years ago. People are living in neighborhoods that are much more mixed. And the nature of people getting along and being able to do things, the more interactions we have with each other, the less racism will exist. The less interactions we have with each other, the more racism exists. Because the more contact we have with a group, the more you see the group as individuals instead of a group. And the more you see less of them, the more you identify them as a group, which creates more of a problem. In some ways, racism the adaptation produces the same outcome. People of color are blocked from moving forward, but have been put in place by a dominant white society and won't or can't admit to its beliefs. The intransient result is another pillar of white fragility, the refusal to know. The clients that I've worked with today have a lot more opportunities than the clients I did many years ago. That's just a statement of fact. There have been more doors opened, more ability for them to be able to access resources and services, and that's a good thing. To state that this is no better than Jim Crow, and that we're basically just like then, when basically there were two sets of water fountains, you couldn't be in the same hotel, if you were interracial coupled, you could be killed in certain places, and to state that's the same as now is just not reality-based. But when you tell a narrative, why do we have to care about reality? It's all about what she thinks. And that's what we care about. So I hope that you like this video. If I said anything you disagree with, please tell me why. And again, if you haven't subscribed, and please go to the link below for the Subscribe-star link if you'd like to become a patron. I wish you a good night and good mental health.